It was 2:17 a.m. when my phone started buzzing like a trapped wasp on my nightstand. I rolled over, squinting at the screen through bleary eyes. Mom's contact photo stared back at me, that familiar smile from last Christmas. But at 2 in the morning, my stomach dropped. Someone was dead. Someone had to be dead. Hello? I croaked, my voice thick with sleep. What I heard next will haunt me forever. My mother was sobbing. Not crying. Sobbing. The kind of broken, gasping sobs that come from somewhere deep in your chest when your world is falling apart. Oh, honey, she choked out between tears. Oh my God. We're going to figure this out. We're going to get you out of there. I sat up, straight, my heart hammering. Mom, what are you talking about? Get me out of where? The jail, sweetie. Jake told us everything. We know about the drugs, we know about the arrest. Your father and I, we've been crying for hours, but we're going to get the bail money together. We're going to... What? The word exploded out of me. I was standing now, pacing my tiny apartment in boxers and a ratty t-shirt. Mom, I'm not in jail. I'm in my apartment. I'm looking at my kitchen right now. The line went quiet except for her ragged breathing. But Jake called us. He said you were arrested for drug possession. He said you needed $5,000 for bail and that we couldn't call you directly because inmates can't receive calls, and that you were scared. And my blood turned to ice water. Jake. My cousin Jake had convinced my parents I was sitting in a jail cell somewhere, probably strung out and desperate. While they'd been crying and scrambling to find bail money, I'd been binge-watching Netflix and eating leftover pizza. Mom, I said, my voice steady now despite the rage building in my chest. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not in jail. I have never been arrested. I don't do drugs. Jake lied to you. I could hear my father's voice in the background, asking what was happening. My mother's breathing was getting more panicked. But why would he lie about something like that? Why would Jake? That's when it hit me. The family dinner last week. My promotion announcement. The new car in the driveway. Jake's face when everyone congratulated me instead of fawning over his latest get-rich-quick scheme. He'd been planning this. The next hour was pure hell. I stayed on the phone with my parents while they pieced together exactly what Jake had told them. Each detail felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Not because of what he'd said about me, but because of what he'd put them through. He called around 6 this evening, my father said, his voice hoarse from crying. Said you'd been arrested, downtown. Drug possession with intent to distribute. Jake hadn't just called me a drug user. He'd painted me as a dealer. He knew so many details, my mother added, still sniffling. The precinct number, the booking process, even what you were supposedly wearing when they arrested you. That blue polo shirt you wore to dinner last Sunday. My hands clenched into fists. Jake had been taking notes, planning this lie down to the smallest detail. He said you were ashamed, my father continued, that you'd begged him not to let us call you directly because you couldn't handle hearing the disappointment in our voices. Said the only way we could help was to get the bail money ready and wait for you to call us from the jail phone. Surgical. That's the only word for it. Jake's manipulation had been surgical. He knew my parents would want to rush to help me. He knew they'd panic and not think clearly. And he knew that if he told them not to call me directly, they'd respect what they thought were my wishes, even though it was killing them inside. How long did you wait? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. 8 hours, my mother whispered. 8 hours of thinking our son was sitting in a jail cell, scared and alone. I had to sit down. 8 hours. While I'd been living my normal Tuesday evening, work, gym, grocery store, Netflix, my parents had been suffering through the worst night of their lives. We called your Aunt Sarah, my father said, and Uncle Tom. We were trying to scrape together the bail money. Sarah was driving over with her checkbook when you called. The ripple effect was getting bigger. Jake hadn't just hurt my parents, he'd traumatized half the family. We need to call everyone back, I said. Let them know I'm okay. But even as I said it, a darker thought was forming. Why now? Why had Jake chosen this particular week to destroy my life? And more importantly, what else had he been lying about? To understand why Jake did this, you need to understand our family dynamic. And to understand that, you need to know that Jake could do no wrong in my family's eyes. Growing up, Jake was the golden child. 2 years older than me, naturally charismatic, the kind of kid who could charm his way out of trouble with a smile and a joke. I was the awkward younger cousin who tried too hard and never quite measured up. When Jake got arrested for underage drinking at 17, it was boys being boys. When I got a B+ in calculus, it was, why can't you be more like Jake? The pattern continued into adulthood. Jake dropped out of college sophomore year to pursue entrepreneurship. The family called it ambitious. I worked 2 jobs to pay my way through school and graduated with honors. The family called it expected. Jake bounced between get-rich-quick schemes and lived off our grandparents' generosity. I climbed the corporate ladder slowly and steadily. Guess which one got praised at? Family dinners? Jake's got such a creative mind, my aunt would say while he pitched his latest app idea that would never see the light of day. At least someone in the family has some ambition, my grandmother would add, shooting me a look that said I was settling for mediocrity. It didn't matter that I'd been promoted 3 times in 5 years. It didn't matter that I'd bought my own car, paid off my student loans, and never asked the family for a dime. Jake was the entrepreneur, the risk-taker, the one with potential. I was just the safe, boring cousin who played by the rules. But something had shifted recently. At last week's family dinner, when I announced my latest promotion to regional manager, the room actually went quiet. Not the polite, obligatory quiet, the impressed quiet. Regional manager, my grandfather had said, setting down his coffee cup. At 28, that's really something. My parents had beamed with pride. Even my aunt, Jake's mother, had congratulated me with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. And Jake had sat there with that smile frozen on his face, the one that didn't quite reach his eyes. He'd mumbled some congratulations, then excused himself to take a business call that lasted the rest of dinner. I should have seen it then. The way his jaw tightened when my father clapped me on the back. The way he avoided eye contact when everyone was asking about my new responsibilities. Jake wasn't just used to being the favorite. He needed to be the favorite. And for the first time in our lives, the spotlight was shining on me instead of him. He couldn't let that stand. The more I thought about it, the more the timing made sense. It wasn't just the promotion. 3 weeks ago, I'd bought my first car. Nothing fancy, a certified pre-owned Honda, but it was mine. Paid for with my own money, no co-signer, no family help needed. Jake had been there when I'd pulled up to show it off. I'd seen him circling it in the driveway, running his fingers along the paint job, asking pointed questions about the monthly payment and down payment. Must be nice, he'd said, to have such a stable job. The way he'd said stable made it sound like an insult. 2 weeks ago, our grandmother had asked me for advice about her investments. Me, not Jake, the supposed financial genius with all his entrepreneurial ventures. She'd pulled me aside after Sunday dinner and asked what I thought about her retirement portfolio. You seem to have your head screwed on straight about money, she'd said. Not like some people in this family. Jake had been within earshot. I'd seen his shoulders tense. And then there was last Sunday's dinner, the promotion announcement that should have been a celebration. Instead, it had been the final straw that broke Jake's carefully constructed image of himself as the family success story. For 28 years, Jake had coasted on potential. But potential doesn't pay bills. Potential doesn't buy cars. Potential doesn't get you promoted to regional manager. Results do. And suddenly, everyone could see which one of us was actually delivering results. So Jake had decided to tear me down. If he couldn't build himself up, he'd destroy my reputation instead. Make sure that when my name came up at family dinners, it would be with disappointment and shame instead of pride. The jail story was perfect. It was devastating enough to completely overshadow any recent achievements. It was shameful enough that, even if people later found out it was false, some doubt would always linger. And it was urgent enough that people wouldn't stop to think critically before reacting. But Jake had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated how much my parents loved me. Instead of giving up on their drug dealer son, they'd been ready to mortgage their house to get me out of jail. Instead of cutting me off, they'd been scrambling to help. Their reaction had been pure love, not judgment. And that love was about to be Jake's undoing. Because now I wasn't just angry. I was curious. If Jake was willing to lie about something this big, what else had he been lying about? Time to find out. I called an emergency family meeting for Friday night. Just immediate family, I told my parents. You, me, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Tom, and Jake. Tell them it's important, but don't say why. My mother's voice was worried. Honey, are you sure about this? Maybe we should just talk to Jake privately first. No. My voice was firm. This needs to happen in front of everyone, trust me. Friday evening arrived gray and drizzling. Perfect weather for what I had planned. Jake showed up 20 minutes late, which was typical. He walked into my parents' living room with that easy confidence he'd always carried, like he owned every space he entered. Sorry I'm late, he said, shrugging off his jacket. Traffic was insane. So what's this big family emergency? Did someone die? The casual way he said it made my stomach turn. This was the same person who'd convinced my parents I was in jail just 4 days ago. Actually, Jake, I said, standing up from the couch, I wanted to talk about Tuesday night. His face didn't change, but I caught it. Just the slightest tightening around his eyes. Tuesday night? What about it? The night you called my parents and told them I was in jail. The room went dead silent. My Aunt Sarah's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. What are you talking about? Jake's mouth fell open in what looked like genuine shock. Jail? Dude, what are you even saying right now? For a split second, I almost doubted myself. He looked so confused, so innocent. This was why Jake had gotten away with everything his whole life. He was that good at lying. You called my parents, I continued, my voice steady, and told them I'd been arrested for drug possession. You said I needed $5,000, bail money. You told them not to call me directly because inmates can't receive calls. Jake's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, concern, dawning horror. Oh my God, he breathed. Someone impersonated me. Someone used my name to cut the shit, Jake. The words hung in the air like a slap. I'd never spoken to him like that before. Never called him out directly. I know it was you. My parents recognized your voice. You knew details about my life that only family would know. You specifically told them not to call me, knowing I'd prove you wrong in about 30 seconds. Jake's performance was shifting now. The innocent confusion was melting away, replaced by something harder. Look, I don't know what kind of conspiracy theory you've cooked up here, but my parents cried for 8 hours, Jake. 8 hours thinking their son was in jail. That's when his mask finally slipped. Just for a second I saw it. Satisfaction. A tiny flash of satisfaction in his eyes before he caught himself and put the concerned expression back on. But I'd seen it. And so had my father. Jake, my father said quietly. Did you make that phone call? Jake looked around the room at all the faces staring at him. His mother, his stepfather, my parents, me. And then he doubled down. Okay, fine. Yes, I called them, but not to hurt anyone. I was trying to protect this family. The room erupted in confused voices, but Jake kept talking, his voice getting louder. I've been worried about him for months. The late nights, the mood swings, the secretiveness. I think he's got a real problem, and I thought if I could get you all to stage an intervention. By lying about me being in jail, I interrupted. By making you realize how serious this could get, Jake shot back. Maybe I went about it wrong, but I was scared for you, man. I was scared for our whole family. It was masterful, really. Even caught red-handed, he was spinning it as concern. Making himself the hero who was willing to look bad to save his troubled cousin. But he'd made another mistake. He'd assumed everyone in the room was still willing to believe his lies. My Aunt Sarah stood up slowly. Jake, she said, her voice deadly quiet. Are you telling us that you made up a story about your cousin being arrested? To help him? I was trying to. You put his parents through hell for 8 hours because you were concerned? Jake's confidence was cracking now. I thought it would shock everyone into action. What action? My father demanded. What exactly did you think we should do about this fictional drug problem? Jake opened his mouth, then closed. For the first time in his life, he had no answer. That's when I knew I had him. After Jake left that night, slinking out with muttered excuses about needing to think about everything, I started digging deeper. If Jake was willing to, lie about something this big, what else had he been lying about? I had a feeling this jail story was just the tip of the iceberg. I started with social media. Jake was active on everything: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, always posting about his latest business venture, his networking events, his entrepreneur lifestyle. But when I looked closer, the timeline didn't add up. 3 months ago, he'd been posting about his consulting firm. 2 months ago, it was a tech startup. Last month, he was apparently launching a digital marketing agency. I screenshotted everything. Then I started reaching out to family members, carefully, casually. Hey, Aunt Linda, didn't Jake say he was working with your neighbor on some business thing? Oh, that fell through weeks ago. He never showed up to the meetings. Uncle Mike, how's Jake's app coming along, the one he pitched at Easter? App? He told me he was focusing on real estate now. Every conversation revealed more lies. Jake had been telling different stories to different people, keeping his fabrication straight by compartmentalizing his audience. But the real bombshell came from my cousin Emma, Jake's younger sister. Can I ask you something? She said when I called her. Has Jake been acting weird around money lately? My pulse quickened. What do you mean? At Mom's birthday party last month, I could have sworn I left $60 in my purse. When I went to pay for dinner, it was gone. And at Christmas, Grandma mentioned that someone had been in her jewelry box, but nothing valuable was missing. Just some old silver pieces that weren't worth much. The pieces were falling into place. Emma, has anyone else mentioned missing money or small items? Actually, yeah. Cousin Beth said her gas card went missing during the 4th of July barbecue, and Uncle Tom mentioned that someone had been going through his workshop, though nothing major was taken. Jake hadn't just been spreading lies about me. He'd been stealing from the family for months, small amounts. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger a real investigation, but enough to fund his lifestyle while his various business ventures continued to fail. There's something else, Emma said quietly. I think he's been reading Mom's texts. She left her phone on the counter last week, and when she came back, Jake was holding it. Said he was just checking the time, but Jake had been gathering intelligence, learning family news, relationship dynamics, personal information that he could use later. Information like what I'd worn to Sunday dinner. Information he'd use to make his jail story more believable. I was building a case now. Screenshots of contradictory social media posts, a timeline of missing money and items, testimony from family members who were starting to connect their own dots. But I needed more than circumstantial evidence. I needed proof. That's when I remembered Jake's girlfriend, Monica. They'd been dating for about 6 months, and she seemed different from his usual type. Quieter, more genuine, less impressed by his big talk and grand gestures. I wondered what she really thought about Jake's various business ventures. I decided to find out. I reached out to Monica on Instagram, keeping it casual. Hey, hope you're doing well. Random question. Jake mentioned he was working on some consulting project with tech companies. How's that going? Her response came back within an hour. Consulting project? He told me he was between jobs right now. Has been for about 3 months. Bingo. Jake had been lying to his own girlfriend about having work, which meant he'd been lying about where his money was coming from, which meant the family thefts were probably just the beginning. Monica and I ended up talking for 2 hours. She'd been having her own doubts about Jake's honesty, but hadn't known how to address them. Small lies that seemed harmless individually, but painted a disturbing picture when viewed together. By the end of our conversation, I had an ally. And more importantly, I had someone on the inside who was willing to pay attention to what Jake was really up to. The net was closing around my cousin, but I wanted to do this right. I wanted witnesses, Thanksgiving dinner. The whole extended family would be there. Perfect. I'd spent 3 weeks gathering evidence, building my case, and preparing for this moment. Screenshots organized on my phone, testimony lined up from family members. Even Monica was coming to dinner, armed with her own. Stories of Jake's deceptions. Jake walked into my grandmother's house that Thursday afternoon like he owned the place. Confident smile, firm handshakes, charming comments about everyone's appearance. The same Jake who'd always worked the room effortlessly. But this time I was watching faces as he made his rounds. Really watching. My Aunt Sarah's smile was polite, but strained. Uncle Tom's handshake was brief. Even my grandmother seemed less enthusiastic than usual. The jail lie had planted seeds of doubt, even among Jake's most devoted supporters. People were starting to see cracks in his perfect facade. Dinner conversation was typical family chaos. Work updates, health reports, political arguments that got shut down quickly. Jake held court as usual, regaling everyone with stories about his latest business opportunities. I waited until dessert. "Jake," I said during a lull in conversation, "I've been thinking about what you said a few weeks ago, about being concerned about my behavior." The table went quiet. Everyone remembered the confrontation at my parents' house. Jake's fork paused, halfway to his mouth. "Oh, yeah. I'm still concerned, honestly. I think we should talk privately about... Actually, I'd rather talk about it here. With everyone." I pulled out my phone.
"See, I've been doing some reflecting and I realized you were right about one thing. There has been some concerning behavior in our family lately." Jake's eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept the confused smile on his face. "I'm not sure what..."
"You mean?" "Well, for instance, there's been money going missing at family gatherings. Small amounts, but consistently." My grandmother looked up sharply. "Missing money? Aunt Linda's $60 at Mom's birthday party. Beth's gas card at the 4th of July barbecue. Grandma's silver pieces from her jewelry box." Jake's face was stone now. "Are you seriously accusing me of stealing from our own family?" "I'm not accusing anyone," I said calmly. "I'm just noting a pattern. See, I started tracking when these incidents occurred, and they all happened at gatherings where certain people were present." I swiped to the timeline I'd created on my phone. Names, dates, amounts, witnesses. And then there are the business ventures. "Jake, didn't you tell Uncle Mike you were focused on real estate now?" Jake's jaw tightened. "I am exploring multiple opportunities." "Funny, because you told Aunt Sarah you were running a consulting firm, and you told the family group chat that you were launching a tech startup. And Monica..." I looked at his girlfriend, who nodded encouragingly. "You told Monica you've been unemployed for 3 months." The table erupted in confused murmurs. Family members started comparing notes, realizing they'd all been told different stories. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this," Jake said, starting to stand. "Sit down." My grandmother's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Sit down." Jake sat. "Monica," my grandmother continued, "is it true that Jake told you he's been unemployed?" Monica nodded, her voice small but clear. "Yes, ma'am. He said he was between jobs and living off savings." "What savings?" my Aunt Sarah asked sharply. "We've been helping him with rent for the past 4 months." Jake's carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. Family members were connecting dots, sharing information, realizing how extensively they'd been manipulated. "And then there's the phone call," I continued. "The one where you convinced my parents I was in jail. The one that made them cry for 8 hours. Jake's mother, my Aunt Sarah, turned to stare at her son. "You really did that? You really put them through that?" "I was trying to help," Jake said desperately. "I thought he had a drug problem and I've never done drugs in my life." I interrupted. "Never been arrested, never been in trouble with the law. You made that up to hurt me because you couldn't handle seeing me succeed." The room went dead silent. Jake looked around at all the faces staring at him. His mother's disappointment, his grandmother's disgust, his girlfriend's growing horror as she realized the extent of his deceptions. "You're all overreacting," he said, finally. "This is ridiculous." But his voice had lost all its usual confidence. For the first time in his life, charm and charisma weren't going to get him out of trouble. My Uncle Tom leaned forward. "Jake, I want you to think very carefully about your next words. Is there anything else we should know about?" Jake opened his mouth, then closed it. The calculation was visible on his face. How much could he salvage? What lies could he maintain? That's when Monica spoke up. "He's been using my credit card," she said quietly. "I thought he was just borrowing money until his next business deal came through, but there is no next business deal, is there?" Jake's face went white. The golden child had finally been exposed, and everyone was watching his empire of lies crumble to dust. The aftermath was swift and brutal. My grandmother, who had been bankrolling Jake's lifestyle for years, cut him off completely. "I will not enable a liar and a thief," she announced, at the dinner table, her voice carrying the weight of final judgment. Uncle Tom and Aunt Sarah stopped paying his rent immediately. "He's 29 years old," Aunt Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "It's time he learned to stand on his own, too." Feet. But the real consequences came from the family relationships he'd destroyed. Monica broke up with him that night. Right there in my grandmother's driveway, she handed him back his key to her apartment and told him she never wanted to see him again. "I can't trust a word that comes out of your mouth," she said. "How could I build a life with someone like that?" 3 of our cousins blocked his number and social media accounts. The family group chat that had included Jake for years suddenly didn't include Jake anymore. Within a week, Jake had lost his apartment and was sleeping on friends' couches. The trust fund our grandfather had set up for him, which he'd been counting on accessing when he turned 30, was restructured to benefit charity instead. But the cruelest justice was the simplest one. Nobody believed him anymore. Jake tried to spin new stories, create new narratives that would explain away his behavior. He claimed I'd manipulated the evidence. He suggested Monica was lying about the credit card charges. He even tried to convince people that his thefts were actually loans he'd been planning to pay back. It didn't matter. His credibility was gone. The family members who had once hung on his every word now greeted his explanations with skeptical silence. His grand business ideas were met with eye rolls instead of encouragement. Jake had spent his entire adult life coasting on potential and charm, but potential without follow-through is just empty promises, and charm without honesty is just manipulation. For the first time in his life, Jake was being judged on his actions instead of his words, and his actions painted a devastating picture. I won't lie. Part of me felt sorry for him. This was my cousin, after all. We'd grown up together, shared childhood memories, family traditions. But then I remembered my parents crying at 2 a.m., convinced their son was in jail. I remembered the 8 hours of hell Jake had put them through for no reason, other than petty jealousy. And I remembered that this wasn't just about the jail lie. This was about years of manipulation, theft, and deception. Jake hadn't made one mistake, he'd made a lifestyle choice. The family was healing from that choice. But Jake was finally living with the consequences of his decisions. Some people might call that cruel. I called it overdue. The months that followed were a revelation. Without Jake's constant drama and manipulation, family dinners became peaceful. Conversations flowed naturally, instead of revolving around whatever crisis or business venture Jake was promoting that week. My relationship with my parents transformed completely. The jail lie had been a wake-up call for them. They realized how easily they'd been manipulated, how readily they'd believed the worst about me without question. "We never really listened to you," my mother admitted during one of our new weekly coffee dates. "We were so busy being impressed by Jake's big talk that we didn't notice your actual achievements. You were the one working 2 jobs to pay for school," my father added. "You were the one who never asked us for money, never caused drama, never made us worry. And somehow we thought that meant you were the problem." They started asking about my work, my goals, my life in ways they never had before. Real questions, not polite small talk. They wanted to understand who I was instead of assuming they already knew. The extended family went through a similar awakening. Jake's lies had been like a fog that distorted everyone's perception of reality. With that fog lifted, people could see clearly for the first time in years. My grandmother started calling me for advice about her investments, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. My aunts and uncles began including me in family decisions, treating me like an adult whose opinion mattered. But the biggest change was in how I saw myself. For 28 years, I'd accepted my role as the disappointing cousin, the one who played it safe while Jake took risks and chased dreams. I'd internalized the family narrative that steady success was somehow lesser than flashy potential. The jail incident forced me to confront that narrative. Jake's risks weren't brave. They were irresponsible. His dreams weren't inspiring, they were delusions. And his charm wasn't a gift. It was a weapon he used to manipulate people. I realized I didn't want to be Jake. I'd never wanted to be Jake. I wanted to be someone people could count on, someone whose word meant something, someone who built things that lasted instead of chasing get-rich-quick schemes. I was already that person. I just needed my family to see it. Setting boundaries was harder than I expected. For so long, family gatherings had meant enduring Jake's performances and everyone's misplaced praise. Now I had to learn how to advocate for myself, speak up when I disagreed, and claim space in conversations. It felt selfish at first, but my therapist, yes, I started seeing a therapist after all this, helped me understand that healthy boundaries weren't selfish. They were necessary. You can't control how other people treat you, she said, but you can control how much access they have to you, and you can control whether you accept their behavior or walk away. The Jake situation had taught me that lesson in the most dramatic way possible, but it was a lesson I needed to learn. My life got smaller in some ways after cutting Jake out. Fewer family gatherings, fewer dramatic stories to tell friends, fewer chaotic holidays. But it got bigger in the ways that mattered. More genuine relationships, more honest conversations, more energy for my own goals instead of managing other people's chaos. I started dating someone new, someone who valued stability over excitement, honesty over charm. I took on new challenges at work, confident that my family would actually support my success instead of undermining it. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was living my own story instead of playing a supporting role in Jake's. It was a good feeling. 6 months after Thanksgiving, Jake tried to come back. He reached out through mutual friends, claiming he'd learned his lesson and wanted to make things right with the family. He'd supposedly been going to therapy, working on himself, ready to be honest about his mistakes. The old me might have been tempted to give him another chance. Family is family, right? People deserve second chances. Maybe he really had changed. But I'd learned to trust my gut instead of my guilt. Jake's apology tour hit all the right notes. Remorse, accountability, promises of changed behavior. But it was still a performance. Still calculated to get the reaction he wanted instead of expressing genuine emotion. Real change doesn't come with a PR campaign. Real change is quiet, consistent, and proves itself over time through actions, not words. I politely declined his request to meet up. So did most of the rest of the family. Jake's flying monkeys, the mutual friends he'd enlisted to plead his case, couldn't understand our stubbornness. Didn't we believe in forgiveness? Didn't we care about family? But forgiveness doesn't require giving someone unlimited access to hurt you again. And family isn't supposed to be a shield that protects people from the consequences of their actions. Jake had burned his bridges deliberately and systematically. The fact that he now wanted to cross those bridges again didn't obligate us to rebuild them. The really satisfying part? My life was thriving without the drama. I got promoted again at work. Bought a house, a real house with a mortgage and everything. Started planning a future that belonged entirely to me. My parents started calling me when they had problems to solve instead of just when they needed someone to listen to their Jake stories. My opinion mattered now. My advice was valued, at family, gatherings, conversations centered around real achievements instead of imaginary potential. People talked about their actual lives instead of their fantasy versions of their lives. It was quieter than the old days, less theatrical, but it was also more genuine, more stable, more real. Jake eventually stopped trying to contact the family directly. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved to another city, was supposedly doing well with some new venture. Good for him, honestly. I hope he really did learn something from hitting rock bottom. I hope he found a way to build a life based on truth instead of lies. But I wasn't curious enough to find out for sure. The last laugh, it turns out, wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about Jake getting his comeuppance or the family finally seeing him clearly. The last laugh was about realizing I didn't need to laugh at anyone at all. I'd spent so much energy being angry at Jake, being hurt by the family's treatment, being frustrated with my supporting role in everyone else's drama. But anger and hurt and frustration were just different forms of letting other people control my emotional state. The real victory was letting go of all of it. Building a life so satisfying that Jake's opinions didn't matter. Creating relationships so genuine that his manipulations couldn't touch them. The real victory was becoming someone I actually wanted to be, instead of someone designed to compete with Jake or please the family or meet anyone else's expectations. That jail phone call at 2 a.m. had been the worst night of my life in some ways, but it had also been the beginning of the best chapter of my life. Sometimes the most painful wake-up calls are the ones we need most. Sometimes the people who betray us are doing us a favor, even if they don't mean to. And sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. If you've got family members who manipulate and lie and steal your spotlight, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to cut off someone you loved because they were toxic? How did you handle it? Because I'm learning that choosing yourself over family loyalty isn't selfish. It's survival, and we all deserve to survive.